All right, let me tell you about this wild story. For about 20 years, this small town in Italy had this really embarrassing problem. They had this public water tower that was always leaking, it was stained, and honestly, it was just an eyesore. But what nobody, and I mean nobody knew, was that this symbol of neglect was actually hiding a totally unbelievable secret right out in the open. And it kind of makes you wonder, right? What if that thing that's been bugging you forever, that problem you just can't seem to fix, isn't actually a problem at all? What if it's something way better? So our story takes place in this gorgeous little town, Castelvetro di Modena, in Italy. And for the people living there, this water tower was no charming landmark. Nope. It was a constant headache. It was always leaking, leaving these weird stains, and people were complaining to the local council about it all the time. And the crazy thing is how long this went on. The whole issue started way back in the 90s with this tiny mechanical failure. Then, a few years later, the leak starts. And for 20 years, it just stayed that way. It became this backdrop to their lives, this symbol of neglect that everyone just kind of learned to ignore. Okay, but here's where it starts to get really weird. Those stains, the ones everyone assumed were just rust, they had this very specific smell. People would walk by and notice it. Even stray animals were apparently drawn to it. It smelled like fermenting grapes. Like a fancy winery. How on earth could that be? Well, the answer didn't come from some long investigation. It came suddenly. On one totally normal Tuesday morning, that 20-year-old secret didn't just leak out anymore. It exploded into the town in the most incredible way you can possibly imagine. Can you imagine? You wake up, you go to turn on your faucet to make some coffee, and out pours this deep, sparkling, purple liquid. Of course, panic just erupted. People were thinking the water was poisoned. Phones were ringing off the hook. But then, one person, who is way braver than I am, decided to do more than just stare. They took a sniff, and then they actually tasted it. And just like that, the whole mystery unraveled. This wasn't some dangerous chemical spill. It was Lambrusco Grasparasa, one of the area's best sparkling red wines, flowing right out of their kitchen sinks. And we are not talking about a little trickle here. On that one Tuesday, the whole system got so overwhelmed that 1,000 liters, 1,000, of high-quality wine burst through the plumbing and into people's homes. It was almost biblical, and it was all because of a simple plumbing mistake. So, you have to be asking, how does that even happen? How does wine from a private winery get into the town's pressurized water system? It seems impossible, but the explanation is this perfect storm of basic physics and one tiny failure. See, it all came down to a battle of pressure. Right next door to the water tower was a winery, Cantina Sedicani. Because of a glitch in their system, the pressure inside their huge wine vats got way, way higher than the pressure in the town's water pipes. So the wine was basically pushing to get out with more force than the water could push back. And that brings us to the single point of failure. There's this little device called a check valve. Its only job is to be a one-way door for liquid, to stop exactly this from happening. Well, the valve that connected the winery to the water main had been broken for 2 decades. It was letting tiny bits of wine seep into the tower's overflow system all that time. But on that Tuesday, the pressure was so high that the tiny seep turned into a massive flood. Okay, so the technical side of this is pretty mind-blowing, but I think the human side is even more fascinating. How could thousands of people see purplish stains and smell grapes for 20 years and not put 2 and 2 together? Well, the answer has a name. It's called cognitive bias. Basically, our brains are lazy. They love taking shortcuts. And one of those shortcuts is to make us see what we expect to see. We are literally wired to ignore evidence, even stuff from our own nose and eyes, if it doesn't fit with what we already believe to be true. And this quote just sums it up perfectly. You see a water tower, your brain says, water? That's the rule. The idea of a wine tower is so ridiculous that our brains just refuse to compute the clues, the smell, the color that are staring us right in the face. They saw a problem, not a miracle. So what happens when this problem is finally fixed? You'd probably expect everyone to be relieved, right? The annoying leak is gone. But the reaction from the town was maybe the biggest twist in this whole story. The city council, of course, fixed the valve immediately. They even put out a formal apology for the contamination of the water supply. But the residents, they weren't happy. They were heartbroken. They realized that for one amazing morning, their homes had produced a miracle. The problem they'd complained about for decades, it was finally gone, and they wanted it back. So, what's the takeaway from all this? I mean, besides being a hilarious story, it's a great reminder that what we call a problem is really just a matter of perspective. One person's leaky fixture is another person's free flowing wine fountain. And, a very practical lesson about always checking your valves. It really leaves you with a final thought, doesn't it? We all have our own leaky towers, those little annoyances in our lives that we've just accepted as normal. Maybe it's time to take another look. Maybe even take a closer sniff. What if it's not a problem at all?